109 tons is the amount of waste that each person produces in one lifetime. Um, 109 tons is a lot of material, and so I've been taking a look at recovered materials, and in the exhibition we're going to test it to see how much we can reabsorb in the building of this home.
1, 2, 3. Ready, set, go.
In a way, the house has been designed 5 times over because of consciously making a decision of what we're not willing to waste.
We're only going to be a sustainable civilization if we can recognize the humanity in everyone and that we do nothing to cause extinction so that species can't survive anymore. So the individual has to feel empowered by having less of an impact on the planet.
I find it my responsibility to not pursue traditional forms of cultural discipline if it means a continued extraction of materials. And so really this is a proposition to think about art making as including material invention. We're seeing Rue over here produce newswood, which is rolled newspaper, and it'll be milled and used as wall covering. It's absolutely gorgeous to see the text that's been milled across and that it is now the next skin and paneling to a home. These are bricks that are made of silica and calcium carbonate. They are grown by using bacteria. Bacteria fuses the bricks together. We have a great amount of corporate and business partners in this exhibition. So WaterBrick is a water container. Essentially, you would drop off water or materials needed in a crisis zone, and then once the contents have been emptied, then the material turns into a building brick. So in this part of the exhibition, we have a material collection. We're essentially asking Hyde Park audiences to collect, wash, clean, and remove the labels of their plastic containers. As we collect plastics 2, 5, and 6 from audience members, we will be processing it and shredding it, and they're gonna be pressed into sheet panels. And the thing that I like about it is when you press sheet plastics, it can get extremely colorific and very galactical because of the way the plastic melts. So for the duration of the show, you will see the show grow and change as we begin to apply sheet press plastics onto the wall. The house at the Hyde Park Art Center will be open for audience members to navigate through the rooms. There will be artworks that are specific to the function of each room. For example, in the bedroom is this piece that I've carved for the show as a way to think about cultural and natural interpretations. You are set up in a situation to read race, but really that would be a trick because human ideas and metaphors really prevent us from seeing the actual material itself. One small and quiet piece is this piece that I've called Silver Tongue Devil. Sewn in there is my own silver hairs. There's a lot of ways in which time and duration operate in the show, but it's interesting to think about it also from the perspective of one human lifetime. Part of the things that I was thinking about is an artist's job is to try to create alternate forms of value. And so I thought, what is seen without value more than waste? And so part of the challenge for me was to sort of go past that philosophical impasse. And so I started out with containers of all kinds, and I feel like that concentric nesting of containers is emulating the kind of rings of a tree. And then, of course, once you're getting that kind of line of thinking that if everything is a container and it contains you, you realize that the house is contained by the Hyde Park Art Center. You realize that the Hyde Park Art Center is part of a larger city, a region, a continent, and then you start to think in larger forms of containers like the planet. The Hyde Park Art Center is going to practice sustainable curation, which means that there's nothing used in the exhibition that doesn't already have a predetermined home, meaning all the materials will be donated to other artists, foundations, and to really limit the amount of waste that we have.
Artists kind of are only artists because they recognize we need to reorient the human attention toward quality of life for myself and everybody I know. We can accept a set of values that we can respect, and our kids can respect us for having.
We're going to get started with our conversation tonight. Thank you all so much for joining us this evening. My name is Sierra McKissick. I'm the Public Programs Coordinator at the Hyde Park Arts Center. And tonight's conversation is centered around the new works featured in the exhibition currently up at the Hyde Park Arts Center, Future Fossil Sum. It takes the byproducts of a throwaway society in the linear economy and grounds a conversation with this panel on the circular economy with perspectives from art, architecture, commerce, and philosophy to discuss their ethos towards future challenges ahead and changing practices at present. So you learned a bit about the exhibition in the video that Lan shared, and hopefully you can make your way to the Hyde Park Arts Center to check it out in person. It's really definitely something to see. We're joined tonight by panelist Kevin Adams, who is the president and co-founder of WaterBrick International. And Kevin Adams leads the business development and operation of WaterBrick International, a company that manufactures and sells FDA-approved and BPA-free plastic water and food containers that also stack like Legos. Kevin has a bachelor's degree in finance from the University of South Florida and an MBA from the University of Florida as well. Everyone, please welcome Kevin Adams tonight. We are also joined by Tegan Moore, an artist based in Montreal, Canada. Her current work considers synthetic entanglements in the built environment through sculpture and installation. She collaborates with Plastic Pollution Research Group, the Synthetic Collective. Recent exhibitions include Plastic Heart, Surface All the Way Through at the Art Museum at the University of Toronto, Foam Fatigue at YYZ Artist Outlet, Immersion Grade, and as a part of the Synthetic Collective, she recently co-authored a comprehensive investigation of industrial plastic pellets on beaches across the Laurentian Great Lakes and the factors governing their distribution, published on the Journal of the Science of Total Environment. Everyone, please welcome Tegan Moore. We are also joined by Meredith Gaglia, an assistant professor of architecture at Louisiana State University. She received a PhD in architecture from Columbia University Graduate School of Architecture, Planning and Preservation in 2019. Her work addresses the development of implementation of sustainable community planning and architectural strategies in the United States from the late 1960s to the early 1980s. Everyone, please welcome Meredith. We also have Ken Dunn, the founder of the nonprofit Resource Center, which is centered around sustainability and started in 1968. Everyone, please welcome Ken Dunn, who's on the screen with Lan here. And our moderator this evening, and the one that our exhibition really greatly brought towards us, is Lan Tuazon, who lives and works in Chicago, where she is associate professor of sculpture at the School of the Art Institute in Chicago. Lan has exhibited internationally at the New Gallery in the Imperial Palace of Austria, Bucharest Biennial 4, the WKB Kunstverein in Germany, and the Lowry Museum in London. I will let Lan take it over from here and introduce our topic and discussion for the evening. Everyone, please give it up for our speakers tonight. Thank you.
I will just speak briefly for our rules of engagement for this evening. Each speaker will speak for about 10 minutes, to which I will respond with a question, and we'll go on to our next speaker. I hope that each person speaks for about 10 minutes as an introduction to their practice, and then the audience members can ask questions of their own. If you are shy today, but but are able to type, please feel free to put those questions in the chat section. We can also go over it that way. I'm very pleased to bring all these four people together for tonight's panel discussion. It's entirely exciting to have all these minds together in this evening. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it off to Meredith Gavgalew.
Okay, share my screen first. Let's hope everything works as smoothly as it did last time. Okay, so now we're seeing just the big screen? Just the slide? Okay, great. Perfect. So hi, everyone. Thanks for coming out to the panel discussion, and thank you to Lan for asking me to be involved and join this great group of panelists. So just to follow up on what Sierra said, I'm an architectural historian. I was an architect. I guess I still am an architect, but now I focus on architectural history, and I focus on the history of sustainable architecture and community design. And today I thought I'd talk a little bit about the appropriate technology movement, which I think is particularly relevant to the panel's larger topic of discussion, and then mention a couple of case studies that might also be helpful. So the appropriate technology movement was born of the US counterculture, and it was born out of a practice theorized by the German-British economist E.F. Schumacher. And appropriate technology, also called AT, was a grassroots approach to economic development. Typically, youthful advocates promoted alternative technological methods, kind of prevent the further environmental, social, and cultural decline of the United States. There's two major reasons that the American AT movement is so compelling to me. And the first is really well explained by this slide, which is why I'm showing it. This is Diane Schatz's illustration, Ecotopia, and it appeared as a poster in RAIN, the Journal of Appropriate Technologies, April 1976 poster edition. And what it shows and what's compelling to me is that the movement was a kind of inclusive array of sustainable practices. So appropriate technologists defined technology in a way that we might not think of today as technology, but it's a way that social issues blend with traditionally technological ones to create a holistic kind of view of community design. And a lot of times the word holistic was spelled with a W in the appropriate technology world, just to kind of hit home the idea of the whole, the kind of synergistic feeling of this. So the way they sometimes describe these was the software and the hardware of AT practice. So the software might include decentralized community-led education, healthcare, economic and community communication systems, maybe. And then the hardware incorporated what we might today describe as kind of sustainable building, sustainable forms of transportation, energy production, and agricultural practices like biodynamic farming, that sort of thing. So just looking closely at this image, we can see multiple instances of AT software and hardware. So if you looked closely at it, you would find like apprentice learning examples in here. There's geodesic dome covered rooftop gardens. There's a community credit union. There are something called a putta cab, which is just a bike cab. And Ecotopia, this image, is kind of trying to demonstrate the healthy future that could be achieved by implementing ecologically and socially responsible methods of appropriate technology. The second reason that the appropriate technology is particularly compelling to me, that I'm not going to talk about, but I can talk about later, is that it's this unusual moment when radicals and also local, state, and federal governments and corporations all decided to work together to implement some of them in like the late 70s, despite reservations on either side. So it's just kind of a fascinating narrative, but once again, that's kind of a side note to what we're looking at today. So when Lan and I were talking about appropriate technology and the use and reuse of waste earlier this week, I was reminded of this quote from Martin Pauly's article, Garbage Housing USA, that focused on the work of Mike Reynolds. And Pauli posited that by applying, quote, the abundances, garbage, to the scarcities, housing, of the developed world, quote, a balance in resource utilization might be reached, which would not require the wholesale dismantling of the mechanism of consumption. And that also reminded me of this comic that kind of looks at the stereotype of an AT practitioner in the final frame, with his mainstream neighbor saying that he's turning into a bumper sticker. He has all of these ways that you should, fix your life in appropriate, sustainable ways. And that's kind of AT at its most evangelical, but for the most part, from the people that I've met and read their work, it appears that most appropriate technologists took more of a poly tack, kind of. They were interested in balance. They were interested in kind of people doing what they can to contribute to a better society, as opposed to like dismantling everything and forcing all of this information down their throat. I'm going to show two examples of appropriate technology, technological architecture. I'm specifically going to focus on material repurposing in these examples, just to close, because I think it's more helpful, kind of more pertinent to our larger discussion. So I previously mentioned Mike Reynolds. I think as a joke for architects, Reynolds invented this thing that he called the can Masonry Unit, kind of a play on CMU, the concrete masonry unit, but this is with cans. It's a rectangular block of like 6 to 8 soda or beer cans tied with baling wire, and that would become a kind of construction block for a larger home. He also came up with this thing called the waste frame that we're seeing here. That's a structural frame filled with soda and beer cans, styrofoam, and a mortar infill. And these are two methods to reuse widely available waste material at the time. And then another excellent example of that approach was the development of sulfur concrete blocks by the Minimum Cost Housing Group at McGill University in Montreal. Solid form sulfur accumulated in the US and Canada due to new environmental legislation at the time, like in the 70s. It prohibited the previous practice of just burning it. But now there were just all of these sort of piles of sulfur, solid form sulfur everywhere. So the MCHG decided to exploit the power of sulfur as a new construction material. And so they took solid form sulfur. Sulfur is a byproduct of the petroleum and natural gas refinery process. And they created a useful building commodity which could be produced and utilized in urban and rural settings in both developed and developing nations, was what MCHG thought about it. Worldwide, the group estimated 80 million tons of sulfur was being burned. So 80 million tons was going into the air. And they thought, even in nations where this is not illegal, if we could promote the ability of this material to create bricks, you could both reduce air pollution and reuse accumulated solid form sulfur. So here we're seeing another instance of using the abundances of waste to address scarcities of housing. And this has an added benefit, right? If the technology were exported, it would kind of solve these sort of air pollution problems as well. And of course, this is also saying, right, the entire project is done on the principle that these groups have decided to work with waste as a kind of inevitable byproduct of modern life, instead of working to dismantle the mechanism of petroleum and natural gas production and consumption. So that's kind of a situation that's interesting around this particular sulfur brick making example. And of course, that comes with the question, like, what are the risks and benefits of this sort of approach to design with waste, or reimagining material use? And so that's something sort of that might come up in the larger discussion. And just to close, this is kind of this little blurb from Rain Journal of Appropriate Technology, and I think 1979. And it just kind of, this magazine just takes a lot of interesting information and puts it along its pages, kind of in different catalog systems. But it says recent glaciological and geological investigations suggest the strong possibility that ice in West Antarctica is crumbling for some unknown reason. And I think it's such a poignant image to show when I'm talking about this era, because it kind of reminds us that the builders at the forefront of this sort of movement, this sustainability movement in the 60s, like they're working, we can see so many parallels with today, but where we've gotten to today was just kind of starting to be discovered. The planetary sort of ecological meaning behind these things, they did not yet know, right, that this was caused by all of the reasons we know exactly now. So I don't like to do direct parallel comparisons typically, but to think about it as multiple groups of people thinking about these issues coming from different perspectives through various points in time. And so, right, I just always remind myself that like everyone is coming with different perspectives and lifestyles. And so when I look at this, I usually focus on, you know, the 60s, 70s, and 80s, but I think it has wider implications for today's world. So thank you for having me. I tried to come in under my 10 minutes.
You did great. You did great. Okay, Meredith, you know, one time we had a conversation and you said, you've blown my mind numerous times during these conversations, but once you said something like, in the 1970s, when the appropriate technologists were working, if they had not been defunded during the Reagan era, some of the solutions that we're needing right now could have been available. And so in a way, as I guess the question that I want to ask you is like, ghosts are those things that are repressed histories that come to haunt you at present. And so in a way, the panel guests that we have with us today are, whether they know it or not, are kind of in some way related to this history of the appropriate technologists. So the question I want to ask you is, what were the challenges of the appropriate technologies then? And what does it mean, again, to work with appropriate technology in terms of what challenges that we practitioners at present have today?
Okay.
Tell the future historian.
Good question. Good question. So I think if we're looking at kind of how things ended with the Reagan administration, it was a funding issue. So people still, I mean, I think Ken is a great emblem of the fact that people have these ideas. Like, it's not as if those ideas ended in 1980. People continued to work with these ideas. And I have spoken to many of them, but it was just the issue of there was a government system that was supporting this for a short period of time. So from the oil crisis of 73 through to when Reagan was elected, there were multiple politicians and bureaucrats that became interested in this as an answer to energy, an energy crisis. And then, you know, government funds were given to it, right? The Environmental Protection Agency, the National Center for Appropriate Technology was funded by the Community Services Administration, which Reagan then defunded, which meant that the program for the National Center for Appropriate Technology was then defunded. But so looking at these, and this gets kind of boring and, you know, bureaucratic, but looking at those funding structures and how much power certain political actors have, the way that allowed people, though, to get the message of sustainability out was really powerful. The fact that Governor Jerry Brown was funding an Office of Appropriate Technology in California, there was a traveling appropriate technology show that went all the way through California and taught people about different things. Simple things like properly insulating your home, things like, you know, toilet flushing. Like, there's no need for 5 gallons of water to flush a toilet. All of these sort of things people are finding out at that point, and it's because there's enough funding, just enough funding, that people can take just enough funding and kind of like take flight with that. And it was happening all over the place because there were these little funds that everyone was given. And so you see communities using this and really growing. That went away. The funding went away. And then it just became kind of that much more difficult to get a group of people to feel, enfranchisement to do all of these things. So it's not as if it necessarily went away. And I think that's important kind of now too. It's much easier if you have a powerful structure to kind of support you, but it doesn't mean that the ideas are absent. It doesn't even mean that the ideas are ghost-like. It's just kind of more of a just kind of under the surface, like a current that just comes up into a wave all of a sudden when it gets a little more power behind it. So I think that if we're looking at appropriate technologies today, I think they're just as needed, of course, as they were at this point in time. And I think we see the government going about trying to do things right now because we're in a situation where we've reached a more positive upswing in support for sustainable technologies, but also technology once again as this software and hardware system, like technologies as how do we make decentralized healthcare in communities? How do we encourage community organization and activism? All of those counted as appropriate technologies. I think all of those are still existing and kind of moving forward today, but something that I haven't seen as much of as I did at that point in time was a desire to create a more synergistic understanding of these all together. So someone who's really fighting for healthcare in small rural communities, working alongside someone who also is trying to help rural communities insulate their homes so that they can save on heating costs, and organizing carpools so people can get to work because not everyone maybe can afford a car and gas. So there's kind of more of it seemed to me historically during the time I was studying versus what I see kind of today, that there was more of a coordinated effort to kind of create a full community with all of the soft and hard technologies versus something that can maybe seem a little more separate when people talk about them today. And I think that's the importance of panels like this, because with panels, right, like this, we're seeing people with similar ideas at different areas kind of coming together. And so that's kind of something that the internet has allowed us to do that would have been more difficult. And that's why you see a bunch of catalogs and things in the 60s and 70s that are trying to, the Whole Earth catalog, Steve Jobs called like the first Google, because it was giving all of these products to help people kind of commit to and live these lifestyles. So I think kind of using this sort of platform is really helpful to start doing the work of connection.
Thank you, Meredith. I feel like you've stated that your answer for those working in this ecotopic movement, appropriate technology, your answer was enfranchisement, education, and synergy. And who better to go after Meredith Gaglio but Tegan Moore, who's artist and member of the collective in Canada, Synthetic Collective. So take it away, Tegan.
Hi, thank you for having me. I'm just gonna quickly share my screen. Okay, my name is Tegan Moore. I am an artist based in Tiohtià:ke, or Montreal, which is the unceded territory of the Kanien'kehá:ka Nation. I am gonna really briefly introduce my own work kind of as it leads into the work I do at this collective. So I am a sculptor and work with installation, and Primarily, I'm concerned with questions around synthetic building materials which are active within the building envelope. So these materials are often like foams and filtration and membranes and that sort of thing. So this is a stock image of actually a dock or billet foam. It's the kind of foam that keeps docks afloat, and it can really easily get out into the environment through storm activity. So this is an example of this particular foam that has been like mixed in with a bonfire. And then this is an example of how this foam, which is unencapsulated, breaks down quite quickly into smaller and smaller pieces. Part of my practice right now is in working with materials in a sort of unending process, wherein I've taken, so in this case, I've taken a small piece of dock foam found on the side of the Hudson River and turned it into a sculpture. This is from years ago, from 2012, where it's been sliced up into many pieces and put back together into something that kind of looks again like a product. And then I've recently taken it apart and used it in another installation wherein it's cut up and sort of put back together in this kind of network formation across a floor. And then it's a material that this particular like stock of material will be used again and again for sculptures into the future with some definite but unknown end. So that's just a real quick intro to some questions I'm thinking about in my own practice. But mostly I come to you today as a member of the Synthetic Collective. And so this collective, oops, sorry. This collective is a group of artists and geologists who work to study plastics pollution. We also produce publications and exhibitions. We have an exhibition on right now called Plastic Heart Surface All the Way Through at the Art Museum at the University of Toronto. The exhibition features data visualizations of this study, as well as artworks created by collective members on the Great Lakes research. So it also includes contemporary artists working critically with plastics and historical plastic artworks and objects, some of which are now degrading, bringing up further questions around the conservation and preservation of plastics in a museum environment. So Plastic Heart proposes an alternative method of exhibition development, addressing environmental sustainability both in its content and in its form. So since plastics are intimately linked to the fossil fuel industry, this exhibition undertakes a kind of auto-critique in which we challenge the carbon footprint of exhibition making itself, that we as artists and curators are
good.
Maybe so. Yeah. I'm getting a strange echo.
Yeah.
Maybe, can everyone make sure they're muted? Perfect. Okay. Yeah. So the exhibition seeks to challenge the carbon footprint of making an exhibition. So in the process of making an exhibition, there are a number of kind of experiments and tasks and tactics that we tried out to try to limit our own carbon footprint. So starting with this is the tidal wall. We built portable solar panels, which have been made mostly of salvage material, designed to power the videos in the exhibition. And this tidal wall, which typically would be made from a single-use vinyl, is made from salvaged billboards, and all these logos down here have been drawn on. The videos are actually shown on iPads to limit the energy that they draw, but also making them compatible with our kind of DIY solar infrastructure. This is a large historical artwork by Naum Gabo in the center, which has come from a local collection. So a lot of the historic artworks that we have loaned from institutions have come from local collections. We didn't paint any walls or fill any holes from the previous exhibition. So we've kind of inherited a number of painted walls, and you can see there's holes, drill holes on either side of this sculpture. A lot of the artworks in the show come from artists in the Great Lakes region, including Lan, and works that come from farther away. We sought to look for only things that were kind of within a certain size range. So there's a number of works which are quite small and compactable. So this is a work by Megan Musso, for example, which has come from Newfoundland, and it's part of a basket series, but this particular basket is quite small. It's about 5 inches high. In this image, there are 2 plastinated hearts, the heart of a mouse and the heart of a raccoon in the front left. In this case, they came from the Royal Ontario Museum, which is just a few blocks away from the art museum. So we arranged to have the collections technician actually walk them over instead of using fine art shippers. There are some very large scale works which have been really inventively compactable. So this is a 9-meter long work which compacts into 2 really small box crates. Similarly, this work by Kelly Jasbeck, who's also in the collective, is made from a salvaged vinyl billboard. And it packs up really small, like into the size of a duffel bag. So in the process, we wanted to limit the building of new plinths or vitrines, which is really common for new exhibitions. This is one exception where we had a tiny vitrine made for a lucite sample made from scraps from a COVID-19 hygienic barrier, really commonly made from this same acrylic material. So here's an example of the plinths which were not freshened up. And this one has a kind of patina from its wear. We exhibited the garbage generated during the installation of the exhibition. So there's 2 examples of the garbage in the exhibition. And we worked with a scribe to write all the labels for the artworks with a local natural ink on scrap mat board from an art framer. Yeah, so these are just some strategies in addition to producing, instead of a catalog, we produced this large field guide for reducing the environmental impact of art exhibitions. So it's a 70-page document, but we've used various design strategies to reduce the size of the PDF so that it can be small enough to fit on our solar powered website, which we power from a small solar panel attached to one of our studios. So in this case with the site, we wanted to model a low bandwidth site, something like a site which de-stresses storage loads and makes the site more accessible in places where slow internet speeds are slow or there's limited data. So some of the methods we used here include making a single page site with content that's easy to find, using dithered images, default web colors and default browser typeface. So in all of these kind of small moves, we're interested in just challenging some of the kind of invisible energy consumption that we as artists, particularly in the art community, like engage in. So like even when it comes down to like email correspondence and sharing images and that sort of thing. I think that's it for me. Thanks.
Thank you, Tegan. Thanks so much, Tegan. The question that I have for you, Tegan, is you once stated that the synthetic collective tried to do the most with the very least amount of resources. And as we can see from your presentation, you do use resources. So I wonder what becomes legible when your resources are things like the sun, the human energy from the scribe, and to sort of use what's available.
Thanks. Yeah, I think it's a really different looking exhibition. There are some things that become visible that one might not even think of, even just with the holes in the walls and the scuffs on the plinths and that sort of thing. But one thing I've kind of thought about just in terms of like reorienting the way that we're thinking about resources by thinking about them in the first place. So, you know, something that's typical for an exhibition is to print out labels for each artwork and put up vinyl didactics and that sort of thing. So with the labels, we were working with like a local contact who works as a scribe. So she professionally does handwriting. And so I think handwriting didactics are kind of an alternative to the printing ones in a way that like changes their value in an exhibition. So they're valued not just as information, but as like as objects that actually took work and care to come into being. So it makes this labor like visible, the labor behind the exhibition. So having them written, I think assigns value and human energy to them in a way that like the traces of the resource, traces of the source are evident in those objects. Like the scribe we worked with, her name is Devin, and she told me that when she went to the post office with her box of finished labels, she patted it like lovingly and said goodbye because she had become so engaged with this exhibition through going through that process. And also as a person who just loves handwriting. With the solar, thinking about solar, I think with this DIY version that we crafted, solar, I think in itself necessitates a thinking about energy, thinking about where your electricity is coming from, and also acknowledging the contingencies of the weather in that process. So I think bringing that into the exhibition to acknowledge like the power that goes into, for example, like a video projection that is floor to ceiling and runs every day for however many days. Sometimes exhibitions are 6 months long, right? So thinking, it sort of forces you to think about the energy that takes, and it requires a different kind of level of decision making too. So we had to we had to show videos on small iPads. And we couldn't really go any larger than that because of the capacity of the infrastructure that we had built. Not all artists are going to want their videos shown on iPads. So there were some artists who didn't want to be a part of it. So it sort of it changes, like in curatorially, it changes who's in the exhibition and also how videos become legible. So not only is the video itself legible, but it's the energy that's powering it becomes visible or legible as well. But it also, there's drawbacks, right? So like a floor to ceiling projection can be really dazzling, and people can have much more embodied experiences with that kind of installation. And so there's a kind of absence of that, whereas certain things kind of get pulled out and some things don't happen. So I hope that maybe that answers your question a little bit.
Yeah, I love it because in terms of the way we think about resources is, it's funny, it has the term has the word source. And yet when we think about supply chains, production, and then later on consumption, the one thing that we don't know is source. We don't know where this came from. We don't know where it was extracted. So I just find it really amazing that when your resources are things like the sun, human labor and care and locality, all of a sudden it is now situated in the world. In a panel discussion we had with Kelly Jasvac, she's like, well, yeah, our website doesn't work because the sun is not shining in Toronto right now. And it just blew my mind away that the website was not available because the sun was not up. And it made it extremely beautiful because it just sort of situated in place. So thank you so much, Tegan.
Thank you.
And now coming up next is Kevin Adams. Kevin Adams, I think, is the founder and COO of WaterBrick. I kind of think about WaterBrick as the Duchampian art object. So we're gonna hear from Kevin. We can't hear you, Kevin. Just unmute.
Yep. Sorry about that. Thank you, Lan. So my dad was the creator of WaterBrick, and that'll be relevant as we go along. But as we look at this first slide, that picture on the left is when my dad was in Vietnam in 1968, and the need to carry water long distances that will print on back to Vietnam. And on the right, you can see some of the work that we did in Haiti in 2010 and 2011 after the earthquake. And again, they're still collecting water like this. And that was a big inspiration for WaterBrick. One of the things that he was thinking about during this time back in 2008 was just the global need for water, for safe drinking water, and how far people would have to trek to go collect water. And statistics like this is a more recent statistic from UNICEF and the World Health Organization, but statistics like this really drove him to be inspired in WaterBrick and trying to solve global need with a better way to do it. When he was having a conversation though with one of his friends, Jean-Michel Cousteau, one of the things that came out very early in those conversations was, great, you get these, you can deliver water, but then when it gets to the other end, then what? It becomes waste. And it becomes waste in impoverished parts of the world where waste management is even more of a burden, more challenging, non-existent. And that really also kind of was a big impression on him. How can we do something that once emptied of its contents can be used for some other purpose? And his background in building and construction and made him think about, well, how can I turn this into basic housing? And again, he didn't want to, not try to solve that issue as well. And so that was where we came to today with WaterBrick. And individually, it's a container. This is a stack of 10 containers, but together they stack like Legos. couple of things that came out was, hey, they're square, so now they ship more efficiently. So that was a great benefit that we didn't originally intend. It becomes a pantry system for people. And then beyond that, we started talking about all the different marketing uses. Yeah, it's one product, but what are all the things that it can be used for beyond humanitarian? How can we get this out here in a bigger way, even in the US? And so we found all these uses that people started engaging in and talking about with us, and that there were these uses, which was very inspiring, and certainly a lot of things that we could market to. One of the things, though, with a new product is we felt the need to test it. I mean, here we are talking about the ability to build housing, and we needed to be clear on how quality of a product this was, how reliable it is, and its durability. And so one of the first things that we did is build this house out of it. And all of these water bricks were filled with sand, so they were very heavy at 48 pounds each. But we did prove with some simulated testing with a third party that it could carry a truss load, and then we built it. And we built it here in the worst possible conditions on sugar sand in an orange grove, with just very basic minimal footing. The back, what you don't see is the roof isn't there on the back side of the building. We did that intentionally. We left it there for a year. With all the rain that we knew would come inside of it, would it shift those walls? Would it still be standing a year from then? And it was. And we were able to also secure it with PVC piping that goes down between the columns inside the container. So it's very durable. That was one of the first early on tests to prove up, can it do what we say it's going to do? Then we started to want to have some fun with it, especially in the US market. And so we had a bear test. And this is something that the National Park System does. So this wasn't just Kevin, being cavalier and running into the bear cage. This was something that was coordinated, and they do this to see if products are safe to be in the National Park System with the animals. From our standpoint, the longer it took for this bear to get inside of it spoke volumes about the product. It took him half an hour. And the full video is on our website. If you're interested, you can go see it, but it's pretty cool, some of the stuff he does with it. And then we wanted to be, also fun, but we also were trying to be practical and thinking about delivering products in from a humanitarian standpoint. So we dropped it out of a plane, and, parachute drop, but, it was 500-foot drop, 250 pounds of dead weight. There was no toggles on it to slow it down. When a person jumps out of a plane, they have the toggles, they pull down, and they can slow it down and kind of just sit right down like a cushion. This did not do this. This came down hard like a ton of bricks. And you can see on the right there that it all stayed together, and it did not bust apart. Again, showing that its durability, that it can do what we said it can do. And we also have that video on our website and also on our YouTube channel, if you'd like to see that. But as we started talking, to more people, and they saw, this product that, when we thought about this product, most products are thought of like the old classic, cradle to grave, and it has a life cycle. And, we recognized early on by speaking to Bill McDonough, who wrote the book Cradle to Cradle, and the idea of talking to Jean-Michel about other uses, how can we make this more sustainable? And there were some happy accidents that came out of that, because the design went above and beyond what a normal product would normally look like, how the specs that were used to design it to do what it was able to do with those secondary uses. There were some happy accidents, and that's fun from a marketing standpoint when you think about it, in terms of a business. And one of them was in conjunction with a partnership with the State University of New York, the physics department, tested it with a grant from the Department of Energy as a radiation barrier. Now, WaterBrick does not stop radiation. So please, for your listeners out there, do not think that's what's doing it. It's the water inside the containers that's stopping the radiation. I did not know that before, but the WaterBrick is what's allowing you to stack the water. And that's how it works. And we get orders quite regularly from nuclear labs across the country using this as a radiation barrier. The other one was the US Geological Survey needed to keep their seismic equipment cool. And so they started wrapping them filled with water to keep them cool. Again, not something we thought about. The next one was as a water ballast or an anchor. The Postal Service uses these in a number of installations to anchor down large antennas on the roof. Some people say, well, why don't they just anchor it to the roof? Well, they don't want to penetrate the roof itself and then cause problems with water damage and leaks. And just, there's those concerns from a damage perspective of the roof layer. So they use these as water ballast to hold down these large antennas. Again, something that was a happy accident that we did not expect. And the last one was in a partnership with Stanford University, their engineering department, using it as a trum wall or a solar heat wall, which was a pretty cool study as well. So, as a business person, that's my background. And, I think about, products and the supply chain and how can you be strategic? How can you have partnerships? How can you be creative and clever in a way to engage the customer? And that's where I come at it from, is the business vision. The business side, I look at it as the inside the box, in the trenches. As an entrepreneur, you're wearing all the hats. Of course, you get all the problems, but there's that execution side of running the business. The vision to me is the outside of the box, the long-term planning, thinking about, especially with a new business, we had to scale this business. We had to do it over time. We had to constantly keep all parts of the business in balance as we grew it. I looked at it as like playing dominoes. You had to knock down certain dominoes before you can knock down others. It was very much strategic for me in that way. Certainly you have to ask yourself, how do you navigate market change? I always loved creating partnerships. Some of the things you saw in this presentation were about how we could create win-win partnerships. And of course, I always look at it as staying relevant, leading, not following. And so that's some of the ways that I look at it in terms of that vision. In terms of the wearing all the hats, this is truly just meant as an eyesore chart to show you all the hats to run a business like this and to grow it and to scale it. And there's so many things to think about. And I bring this up because of a question that we'll get to with Lan. But again, these are all the hats that I had to wear to get there. So for me, innovation is, and I'm stealing this from somebody else, Paul Sloan, who I just thought this was a brilliant comment. Creativity is thinking of something new. That was my dad. Innovation is the implementation of something new. And that's what I was able to do with him in partnership with him, which was pretty special. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Kevin. That was really wonderful. And so there's our primary audience is coming at this from an artistic perspective. I am of the belief that that art as a field was created precisely to contain all the contradictions of society and politics. So if artists resume their art practice and critique society and critique politics, critique the conditions of the everyday life, they're doing exactly the right thing that art is designed to do, which is to create a space in which it can be contained and that it would never impact the larger society. And so this is why I kind of think it's amazing to hear you talk about these business hats, Kevin, because the thing that's so great about the WaterBrick is that it manages, it manages to impact everyday life. This is going to be an object that is an ingredient, a tool, a retooling of our everyday lives. And I wonder, what are some key concepts in business that artists in the audience can take away? If Meredith Gaglio said something like, enfranchisement is one of the things that are important for the appropriate technologists of today, I wonder if you can give us just an idea of key concepts of business that artists should be thinking about.
Well, I think I talked to a lot of people that are artists. My mother-in-law is one of them. And for me, I think the biggest thing is that trying to find a way to bring your art to commerce. And you know, I always love the creative ideas, but when the rubber meets the road, how can those ideas find their way into product development? How can they find their way into business development? You know, these questions that plagued my dad as far as the challenges that he was presented, that this is a great example of how a new design and art can come into this in terms of adding sustainability. And so I would just say to art students, I think it's great to imagine, but how can you take that to the next step and introduce it into commerce? How can you partner with somebody that has a business mind that can work with you to bring this to commerce? And for me, that's what I did with my dad. He was always more creative in what he did in his career, but he always struggled on the business side. And I think the partnership between he and I was critical in taking what he had done and implementing it into business in a way that could be sustainable from a business standpoint. And one of the things I think about is the way that you could do that is maybe through mentors, through you know, businesses do it through a board of directors. How can you bring a community of people, like-minded thought leaders together, but that bring different perspectives, that wear different hats, that bring different expertises, that together can complement each other and go beyond imagining and actually bring it to life? And to me, that would be huge if they can take that step.
Yeah. For the artists who are kind of cringing that I've asked you this question, because we hear commerce and part, like maybe some of us kind of, you know, as a philosophical reaction, sort of move away from it. But actually, I think some of the things that you brought up in terms of execution, return, supply chain, and costs and revenue, these are kind of great ideas to think about, just in terms of sustainability of the practice itself. Unless we can reproduce the conditions that we need, the resources we need to continue making the art, those productions will they will falter. And so, Kevin, thank you so much for speaking to us, and also thank you for donating the WaterBricks that take up a great presence in the exhibition.
You're welcome.
And last but not least, and sitting with me is Ken Dunn. Kevin, if you can unshare screen. Kevin, can you unshare screen? Cool. All right, now I'm gonna navigate for Ken. 1 second.
I can continue with the notion of creativity and innovation. I think we have to respect the human's ability to come up with a new way of doing almost everything. And one thing we've slipped up on is that some of the techniques we've introduced, like mechanization and a worldwide food system, they haven't been evaluated after their innovation. They seem to be very profitable for certain sectors, but we have to ask, does it really serve the needs for humanity? So that's been my interest in our sustainability organization. We do recycling, composting, and urban agriculture, but that's as opposed to an industrial agriculture, which actually was born out of what we're going to do with the industry that we developed to fight our wars. How can we keep that industry going? And industrial agriculture is using the chemicals of warfare to fight the bugs or weeds that might diminish your agriculture, as well as the machinery like the adaptation of the tank to pull the plows.
problem, however, is that soil needs to be loose enough for a rich environment underneath for water to absorb into the soil. So they actually had to start, their first tractors were weighing 10 tons, and there's a lot of compaction. So soon they had to develop bigger tractors that weighed more to break up the soil further down, and the race continues. And we've not really moved out to evaluate whether we're the better off for this. And so let's just look about the global economy. It was quite a device to actually move capital into place where more efficiency could be achieved, but has it led to a better quality of life for all of our communities and the possibility for life on this planet to emerge? So I think what we need to do is welcome all innovation, but actually subject it to analysis. Does it actually meet the needs that benefit humans? And so the various projects of the Resource Center was to demonstrate that we can reuse our cardboard, our bottles, our cans, and food waste to build a society that benefits from reuse and less impact on the environment by just our carbon footprint. So we've developed trucks that pick up food waste in 96-gallon containers, and the ability to compost that to spread on farms. So as an alternative to the industrial food system, which is very detrimental to the quality of life on this planet, both for ourselves and the species we depend on, I've been working for an urban food system, which could be completely self-sufficient based on what we know was the miracle of this planet. Food waste, if returned to the soil, can be the benefit of the next crop. And one of the things where art enters in, you'll see the line of chairs there. That's a table setting for 200 people. We invite to the farm. The food is prepared by a renowned chef, and people are eating in place and eating in season because what's harvested from the farm is served right there. This project was an art project of Dan Peterman and
I think you have a slide. Wait,
yeah.
Rick recommendation.
Rick. We actually did this at one of our first farms in the early 70s, that we invited people to attend the event called Eating in Place and Eating in Season. They were given a plate with pizza dough on it and were invited to walk the farm and pick their pizza. And so it was quite aware that we were eating in place and eating in season. We've since then developed a system that has achieved great success both in Australia and is being implemented in France. That is, as we're finding the industrial agriculture is depleting our growing regions, we need to grow food closer to the city where also water is scarce and should be conserved, as well as nutrients are usually sent to the landfill. We need to take all nutrients and make them available to the growing of our food. So we've developed a system which actually protects from industrial damaged areas, like all cities are, more or less. We've tested over 200 lots and has more lead, arsenic, cadmium, and petroleum than you'd want to grow your food in. So we've developed the technique of building a pan out of compacted clay, and the pan can cover up to 2 acres. The sides around the outside are 2.5 feet of compacted clay, and in the pan is compost only, 2 feet deep. After a 6-inch rain, the plants are growing in a 6 inches of drier compost, but you dig down 6 inches and you find artificial water table. No water runs off of the site because of the berm around the outside, and it doesn't seep in to go beyond the reach of the roots, nor the nutrition of the compost is carried by rainwater beyond the reach of the roots. So that we, on an acre, can produce $160,000 of value of crop ready to be eaten locally. And we can do this with 5 people employed year-round, so that the annual salary is $30,000 for each of the 5 workers, and they take home all the food they can use to feed their family. So that's our notion of sustainability projects. Not only do we have to bypass a failed system, it's clearly known that industrial agriculture and worldwide distribution harms both the rich and poor, which it allows somebody less access to the nutritious food and others more access. So our system, we sell a lot of the food we grow, at least half of it, to high-end restaurants who then we pick up the food scraps from, and they can advertise on their table, this salad came from the waste from our trimmings here in our kitchen. So in sustainability, we not only need to find ways to replace failed systems, but first we have to recognize they're a failure, but replace the failed systems in a way that can be sustained in our communities. Based on the city of Chicago, we have about a third of the city, half of the space is vacant because of the community has declined and incomes have declined and housing is destroyed and they're vacant. So we have to go back to an original notion of what an economy is. An economy is asking a community what you have and what you need, and how can you convert what you have into what you need. So communities that have 50% of its space despoiled by being after industry, and food stores not really supplying less fresh food in that area, you think, well, this community has space and it has access to plant waste from the restaurants surrounding it, as well as all other kinds of yard waste and other material. Could compost be put on these lots, employing the local population to produce the food they need? And I think here we again, we notice a intersection with art. Art is actually a culture, and cultivation includes agriculture, but also art is actually producing enjoyment in the areas which we inhabit as well. So if we bring food production, cooperating of the community to do these basic tasks, do we get a community that is a richer one to live in? And here we see Chef Rick Bayless, who's been a supporter of our work throughout the time that he's been in Chicago. He actually did a fundraiser for us recently to purchase property to develop a food hub, which is a place where the incoming product could be processed to be shipped out to customers, but also to be the food in the winter, where growing in Chicago is not as plentiful. We can grow in year-round under plastic hoop houses to extend the season, but the production is about 1/5 of what it would be in the summer when you have more warmth and more sun. So the food hub would actually preserve by freezing, canning, and other ways of, well, the food that comes in would be all that's wasted in Chicago now because we are a food hub, and there are 600 tons a day that comes with unexpected consequences. Sea container banana starts to get brown. It doesn't have the 5 to 10 days freshness required in the for-profit food system. So we need this truck to be unloaded and taken directly to farm stands and food distribution networks so that it can be consumed the next day. And so the food hub envisions the food coming in being sent to the kitchen for value upgrading or preservation. Some food, semi-trailer loads that arrived in Chicago that had been sitting on the side somewhere. The fresh corn on the cob was brown and unedible by humans, but we fed that to our chickens and hogs on this property. So there are devices like that that we need to shift as a civilization from thinking that our energy comes from petroleum and those related hydrocarbons. Our quality society comes from nutrition as it's found in our food waste, in our yard waste that can provide local industry for all of the community to be instrumental in and build a community that has a higher culture where people actually come to agreements on what is beneficial to the community and what is not. So we need to develop more skills of evaluating the things we've got going. And I think we just have to flatly find that the industrialization of society has utterly failed. It's failed in the health of our communities, the health of our culture, and the ability of communities to meet together and come to agreement on how we should proceed that benefits all of mankind. And the worst thing about achieving sustainability is still involving in warfare. Warfare is one of the most destructive things possible. And the first thing we have to do to eliminate warfare is develop techniques in communities where we can communicate with each other and come to a understanding that all human beings are equal in the need to take advantage of the resources of the planet for a quality of life. And once we do that in our communities, we'll find that there's less reason for warfare. Plato said the business of humankind is to provide equality, equality among people in your community, which allows for less theft and subterfuge in your own community, but also among nations, less chances of one nation wanting to take over and harvest the resources that they can provide. So I'd like to skip directly from some of the programs we've implemented. Well, we eliminated gangs selling drugs in the community where our main yard is by involving using our compost on every vacant lot that the gangs would move their compost or their drug selling. They would find that with cooperation with the community on that block, we would install a farm on that block, on that vacant lot that would be populated by the sets the community had developed, so that the community had developed functioning in the opposite hours of the gang. The gangs would come at 3 or 4 to begin setting up their drug sales. and they would sell until 2 in the morning, and they would retire, and the rest of the community could go to school, but they had to get home with doors locked and drawn shades. So there are techniques that use the power of community rather than the power of a gun or any other tool. The city thought building destruction would eliminate the gangs. Didn't, but putting a community garden on every vacant lot in the community of Grand Crossing limited drug sales in that community in the late 80s. So I think what we now have to focus on is finding a combination or a partnership between an economy and an art that serves the local community. And that would be each of us have to find roots in a community. And what does the community have? We have to build a way of employing and moving money in that community. So I think we have to follow the coin. Do we spend a coin that leaves the community? I think we should avoid that. We should spend a coin that stays within the community and maybe even evolves trading food for shoe repair or our production of food should be traded for clothing for something made here locally. So I would suggest we need to rebuild community with the absence of our technical devices. Technical devices allow fake communities. Anybody can find on the internet somebody that happens to exploit some trauma they've had to feel that they have to do this or that. And it allows the avoidance of real community with your neighbors to find the real things that communities can go together. And what used to happen in the open air market is what we have to get back to in every community, where every need of the community can be met there. Shoes repaired, coffee shared, food purchased for the consumption of the rest of the week, and music shared as well as dance and sport. We need to take our outdoors back again to have things that really build the community and prevents the coin from leaving the community. The coin can either be exchanged locally, but each of us need to put down roots and join together to find a higher quality of life, a higher way of being in the world, which treats every human being as equally entitled to the benefit of the planet, but also every living thing has to have the same benefit, including our waters, our mountains, our forests. And we can do that by rooting in local communities, recapturing some spaces that have been ruined for growing food by using the local resource. And we need to build a community in open space. No more of these closed rooms where only this community goes or that community, but we meet in the open, respecting each other as equals. And I think also taking a human trait of listening more than you talk. The art of listening is the only way we enrich ourselves. The world is so much what we cannot see and probably should not see by using air travel. But we can talk with people who have seen that world. And in fact, the more to listen to people who might be new to our communities, to welcome refugees and people from other communities because they've seen and experienced things we have not. So back to the local community where each of us have roots and build a quality of life that we can all enjoy equally and might preserve for the benefit of our offspring and future generations.
Yeah. Ken, thank you so much.
Thank you.
You know, Ken, I have this question for you. You know, just a few days ago, I was talking to Tegan Moore, and she was like, "Lon, have you read Braiding Sweetgrass?" And I said, "I haven't." And then I immediately started listening to it as I work in the studio. But there's something in text where the author states something like that she made this distinction between the cosmology of, say, a Christian cosmology of Eve being expunged from the Garden of Eden, that Eve was an immigrant, and then compared it to the Potawatomi sky woman that was expelled from the heavens and also an immigrant. And she made this like point that everyone is displaced, everyone is an immigrant. But once you start having stakes in the sustainability of the land and for it to become available for the next generation, then you root and you become native to the land. And it just really struck me that in these divisive times, if we share this rootedness, or we have, like, it just struck me as a generosity that as soon as we have stakes and care of the land that we're in, we have claimed our home or native to the place that we're in.
Yes.
And I just thought that that was an incredibly generous idea. And then Ken, you know, there's a few things that you and I have talked a few times. You stated something like, with all the challenges that we're currently facing, and then now we're seeing what's happening in Afghanistan, we now have to prepare ourselves to take care of those we hurt. And it just like struck me so deeply to think about rootedness and care. You started this in the late 60s. And in a way, I'm just going to be completely vulnerable and say, there's something fearful about this kind of work, right? Because once we start, you're like, oh God, this is the life project that we're going to enter into. And I happen to know that you don't take a day off. And so I've also heard you say that it starts with the individual. And so you were you were in University of Chicago as a philosopher. You wrote a dissertation, and something changed between ideation, thought, and action. And so there's this panel discussion is live right now, but then this will be used for educational purposes and disseminated elsewhere. So I guess for the audience members now and in the future, what about that fearful start? It starts with the individual, and the quiet fear is, this could be my entire life.
And actually, the other point is we almost become rooted, but not use the tools that are presented by our technological society. When you're rooted in a community, you don't bring in specialists to do advertising, to develop a better style of life. You don't send in the armed police to solve all disagreements. You instead learn to use our basic human technique of listening and reasoning with each other. And if we do that, we can build communities. But by always sending in an industrial tool, like I mentioned, when we eliminated gang ruling the community of Grand Crossing here in Chicago, we didn't use any power at all. We just, in the off hours of the controller of a vacant lot, we turned it into a community garden. And the community soft touch made it inaccessible to the gangs. And so we did over 2.5 years, we did some over 100 lots in the community, and they had to go to some other community to sell their drugs. So we shouldn't think we have to have expertise employed by us bigger firms to do the projects we need. We don't need to knock down houses. We need to board them up to save them to where someone can use it again, and which we did. We need to get people interested in the project, not by sending in a advertising firm and its talented experts. We need to just talk to neighbors. And so eliminate the tools that are most commonly offered, and you'll discover the local community has all of those tools. And I think the congregating in open spaces that are accessible to everybody is the way to start recognizing the power of the simple tool of engaging the community with our devices of listening and asking questions. How would you improve this if you think the industrial agricultural system is sending you bad food? Grow it yourself.
All right, now I'm gonna give a clap for all our panelists. I think we're gonna give a few minutes, 10 minutes or 15 minutes, whatever the panelists will allow. We have time for audience questions. So guys, I just wanna say that the soft touch, this is not the first time I've spoken to these individuals, and it's just wonderful to have them all together here. But I would open the opportunity for you, the audience, to join the conversation by asking your question. Now I zip it.
Hi, I have a question. So going off of what Ken was saying about how this like individual practice is really important, about thinking about how we do this work on our own, with our neighbors, with our community. But is it important that we expand this? Like, let's say the city farm, since it's doing so well, it's where the system is working in a cycle on its own in one place, but can we expand this sort of vision and practice on a global scale without thinking about making profit?
Yes, in fact, a university from Sweden actually first visited the technique we developed of making the clay pan, and somehow that research or that paper got to Australia. Australia called me in 2001 and said, can we send a documentary crew to document how this is done? And I said, great, but how do you know about it? And they said, we are experiencing desertification of our food growing areas. It's becoming desert. We don't have enough water and good soil in the city, but if you can reclaim tainted soil by sealing it off and growing only in compost near where the food product is grown, we can grow good food with less water. And France, a couple years later, actually sent a film crew to do the same thing. At one point, we had a contract with the federal government, the city of Chicago, Whole Foods, and the city of Chicago, the state of Illinois, to have 200 acres of farms on the west side, which would provide jobs for 200 acres, that's 10,000 people. And it actually, our politics is infused with industrialization. If it can be done on an industrial scale, it's thought to be doable. But in fact, it's the existing industry that was landfilling the food waste that would lose it if we were to be composting it all. They found a way to scuttle that. So it can be done worldwide. And in fact, it is necessary for our survival as a species. We've got to start demanding less water and less chemical applications. The simple thing of organic is non-organic agriculture is using all the industrial outputs that were for warfare. Organic agriculture is just the opposite, providing everything the plant needs in hopes that it will produce something that is useful to you. And in the open air, with rich compost and adequate water supply, you can grow the $160,000 of food product on an acre, whereas it takes a family in industrial agriculture perhaps $5 million worth of equipment to farm 1,000 acres, and they can get a couple $100 or up to $500 an acre. So it's absolutely the locally tended hand farming or gardening is the way we have to go. We cannot continue with industrial agriculture and shipping those products all the way around the world. Mm-hmm. We need to eat locally, in place and in season. And that's what the food hub that I mentioned that I talked to Rick Bayless about, and he raised the money to buy the property that we're on our way to developing the industrial kitchen, freezing ability, and composting ability to supply all the vacant lots with rich compost, which can be the jobs for all local communities.
We have another question from Adrian Long. Adrian, do you feel comfortable articulating your question, or shall I read it?
Sorry, I'm in a quite noisy environment. I think I was just thinking, I felt very inspired by a lot of the presentations. And I think I was just trying to square the idea or the ethos that I'm sort of drawing from your comments, Ken, about the focus on community and the sort of suggestion that there could be the possibility that communities could sustain each other in ways. You use the word coin, which is a term that I'm not completely familiar with, but it seemed like that was a very carefully chosen word in that it's not necessarily money. You know, there could be some sort of community token with which you could share your services for others within the local environment. And, you know, that comes on the heels, of Kevin's call for commerce. Okay, sorry. It comes on the heels of Kevin's call for commerce to be the vehicle through which, you know, creative ideas are propagated. And, you know, clearly his work and your work are operating on different scales in different ways. I was just trying to think if either of you guys could find a way to reconcile those two kind of calls for action.
Kevin, do you want to take this question? You're on mute, though.
Sorry about that. You know, I would simply say that they're not so different. They're not so different. Whether you are exchanging services or goods for money or coin or bartering for other goods and services, it's still all transactions of people getting win-win from each other in that transaction, in that community. And I'll give you a good example. I share some of your feelings and thoughts because, you know, even in my world, which may seem distant and different from yours, it's not necessarily. I mean, I was at a conference probably about 7 years ago, and I said to my dad, I said, I'm just going to walk around and just see if I can be creative and engage with some of the other people that were exhibiting. And I walked across this company that was selling their airdrop services. And I got to talk to them, and I said, you know, based on what they were telling me, I said, we've been wanting to show how our product could be airdropped, and you're looking for a product to airdrop. and they did it for us for absolutely free. We gave them our product so they could have a product to use to airdrop and show and demonstrate in their own marketing. And for that, they did it for free for us and gave us all that video. I mean, even in the business world, you can find ways to do things like a bartering system and find win-win propositions with people. That's some of the most fun that I have, to be honest with you. But I think what I was trying to get at is that art and design and some of the thinking that's going on in think tanks and incubators like this, I'm encouraging that they go beyond the walls of imagination and get it implemented, however they get implemented, whether it's more through Ken's way of doing that or whether it's more through traditional commerce, doesn't matter. But if it doesn't get implemented, then it dies there with you. And if we can use that ideation and imagination to enrich the world that we're wanting to enrich, we've got to get it out there to the people, or else it's not going to change anything. And I think that was my bigger point.
Yeah, and I could add, it's innovation as you described equally, even though it doesn't use the broader technology. Our innovation was discovering that we could have the producers of compostable materials pay us to take them so that we can make the compost and deliver it to the farms at no charge to the farm, because we're completing the cycle for this restaurant. They're giving us their scraps, but paying us to take it, and then they're paying us to get the food back again. And so the innovation is adjusting the normal cost system. Instead of having to pay dearly for your compost, we find the parties that are disposing of it are willing to pay enough to have the compost made and delivered to the farm. And that organically grown is higher cost than industrial agriculture, because there are those costs of buying the compost. But if you make your complete system deliver the compost at no charge, you get something that will survive in the present economy. And that was before I decided to spend a lot of energy on trying to advance sustainability way back in the 60s. I actually gave myself a few tests to see if I could innovate to make something work where it was not working, something that could be sustained these 50 plus years that we've been doing it. And so,
well, just to piggyback one quick example to further to Adrian's question and marry up what you just said. My wife's uncle has a dairy farm in Vermont, and they milk about 1,200 cows a day. And they built a digester and a robot that scrapes the barns of the manure and automatically brings it into a digester. And 3 weeks later, it turns into basically fertilizer that they can turn around and use on their own farm. But in the meantime, they create enough power to power their entire farm on cow power, and then enough to sell back to the grid. And versus just letting that go to waste. And that's one of your techniques, right there, Ken, that's incorporated right into a traditional commerce business that's benefiting us all. And so, I mean, I really see them as entwined. They should be married together. And the more we can bring these things together, I think it's good for everybody.
Yeah, I think it's good to also bring up something that Tegan was talking about, which is that when we start to, Ken wants to redefine economy between what you have, what do you need and what do you have. And then Tegan's practice is to take a look at alternative forms of resources, human labor, solar, locality. And so I guess with that kind of third element in this question that Adrian asked, the notion of commerce, whether we should think about if money is a resource that is predominant, is no longer a question now, because the resource itself has to be redefined. I'm going to ask, is there another member of the audience that has one more question, or is there a panelist that has a question for the other?
I have a question.
Yes, go for it.
Thank you for conversation and presentation. Very glad to meet you. And yeah, we are speaking about changing system, but I have no any doubts how we can change system when like huge corporation took control on like food production and other spheres. So how it's like, how we can imagine some shift to green economy when like some big companies just making money and that's all. I mean, do you have question or answer?
Meredith, Tegan, you guys interested in answering this question?
I can answer how it's happened before. Okay, so in 1970, sometime in the 1970s, in Costa Rica, there was a infestation, basically, and at that point, Costa Rica had been made by major corporations essentially to be a single crop nation, right? So what used to happen was there used to be biodynamic farming, where different crops were grown all over the place together, and different varietals. You know, we talk about heirloom vegetables today. This was just the norm at some point in time. And so as people began to have single crop economies, if there happened to be some sort of infestation, some sort of pest, there's nothing really to be done. The whole crop was gone. And in that way, the economy also suffered. And then because it's a single crop economy, the people who lived there also didn't have food. So what ended up happening in Costa Rica at this specific moment, it was cacao, I believe, that was the crop. The government of the Netherlands partnered with a couple groups of like appropriate technologists to come up with new crop systems to grow. So a kind of answer to that is that it's kind of, to a certain extent, fighting power with power. So in this situation, a government group decided that that's what it wanted to do, that this sort of, the Netherlands government was going to help these people with specific knowledge to step in and kind of go against corporate power, right? But there's not necessarily a way to kind of magically make that happen. It's true. So it takes, like, I think it takes grassroots level work. So we have like the work of Ken in Chicago, the work of others, and then at the same time, and the work of people in Costa Rica at this moment. But then it also takes some top-down support in some way. It takes someone with power. So whether that's someone who has the clout to raise money, whether that's a government official who decides to like go out on a limb and say, we need to do this and gather support, whatever the top down is, sometimes the top down plus the grassroots, like together, are making this moment happen. And so I don't know how that, you know, I don't know how you make that happen, except that you keep kind of fighting for it at a grassroots level. And someone at a higher level maybe says, like, you have Rick Bayless helping you, right? Like Rick Bayless saw what you do. And Rick Bayless said, you know what? I think this is important. I'm going to throw my weight behind it. And because he threw his weight behind it, something happened. And it doesn't change what you're doing on a day-to-day. It just allows you to like really ramp it up and do something else. So there has been historically moments when this can happen, right? But it does take some people working on the ground and also some people helping with like financing, kind of in a nonprofit scenario. And so, you know, like that's how, if that's how a lot of things happen. Like historically, that's how things have happened. Whether that's something, Lan and I talked a lot about whether things that happened at some point can happen again today. And I'm not really sure, but in the past, that sort of thing has worked. It's just that never took off. That wasn't a global answer. It's not as if someone said, "Oh, like a single crop economy, that's a horrible idea. Let's all change," even though it is in fact a horrible idea. You know, so it was just kind of multiple people making changes at different levels. And I don't know how you get that to happen, right. But except just like you work at your level. What is your level and where do you get to? If you're at a high level, like do it, help someone. If you're at a lower level, keep working at it. I feel like that's kind of what has historically worked.
Yeah, and also
not a real answer.
That was a perfect answer, Meredith. One of the other things that we talked about, I was like, well, when the appropriate technologies were working, it was at a time of crisis during the Vietnam War, and so many things were going on. And then I was like, oh, wait a second, the crises never stop. We're just constantly fed on crisis. So on one hand, what's occurring consistently is crisis, war, waterborne diseases, as Kevin said, plastic pollution, the dying off of species and stuff. And then you also said, Meredith, it's not like the appropriate technologies just disappeared. They're still there. And then I wonder who Biden is going to call, you know, with these new policy changes. And I guess I think it's interesting that when we come up with a problem, we either overwhelm or underwhelm. In both cases, we just get overwhelmed and then the problem seems too big to fix. And then we underwhelm like it's not that big of a deal. And so I think there's something interesting about the fact, well, make sure you get to the point where you do enjoy the problem and let yourself fail 5 times, as Mike Reynolds says, before judging the entire enterprise. Is there somebody in the audience that has a burning question that's super quick? Because we're really over time and I really appreciate the time of the panelists. Is there one more? I'm gonna stay quiet. Okay, I think it is fair to conclude there. I hope thank you guys all for attending. Do not turn off. I do have a proper send off. Thank you all for coming for the panelists. Thank you to the Hyde Park Art Center for organizing this. And I hope this panel has done exactly what Meredith says that we need for the future to come, which is enfranchisement, synergy, and education. So I hope you guys have a wonderful night. Thank you all for coming once again. Thank you, panelists.